President-elect Donald Trump there speaking at Mar-a-Lago, speaking to reporters for the better part of 30 minutes. It started off as a press conference where he made a major announcement with the CEO of the Japanese tech giant SoftBank, that company pledging $100 billion investment into the U.S. in addition to 100,000 new jobs. The president-elect then, after that announcement, went into what he plans to do on his first few days of office, including his agenda for everything from the economy to immigration to world issues to bringing the hostages back in Gaza to ending or resolving the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. A lot to go over here. CBS News political director Fin Gómez is joining us now to recap some of those remarks. Woo, Fin, there was a lot of news to come out of that conference.
It was a lot.
I know. Okay,
right.
So initial thoughts.
Wide-ranging.
Wide-ranging. Okay, so what stood out to you just first off the bat, and then we'll get into the different issues.
Well, a lot did. I think, not only his defense of some of his problematic picks for his incoming cabinet, including RFK Jr., his pick to head HHS, of course, and who was on the Hill today, I think, saying that he would be much less radical, that he has an open mind. On the polio vaccine, he was asked specifically about the polio vaccine. He said he was a huge believer in it. Of course, this comes after reports show that RFK Jr., a lawyer that worked with RFK Jr., Aaron Siri, had asked the FDA to revoke that polio vaccine. So answering on that front, but also criticizing the Biden administration's authorization to allow the Ukrainian military to use long-range missiles against Russia. He said that he indicated that he may reverse that policy, and he criticized the timing of it so close to when his administration would start. But on a wide range of issues, as you said, Kim, from the border to the tariffs that he's talked about, has campaigned on, to some of the lawsuits against media companies. He did reference that he did indicate that he was planning on filing a lawsuit against the Des Moines Register, the ex-pollster there, and Seltzer, who came out with a poll right before the election that showed that Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, of course, had a double-digit lead against Trump. Trump, of course, won Iowa, but he referenced that as another point of the media and journalists being unfair, and indicated there could be more litigation against some of those media targets that he had. So a lot.
Yeah, no, and he also went over big news events. I mean, he talked about how he thinks the U.S. government knows more about these drones. He even commented on the United Healthcare CEO's murder. Back, though, to government policy, he made this comment on his Health and Human Services Secretary pick, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's play some of that here. Take a listen.
No, I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical. But there are problems. I mean, we don't do as well as a lot of other nations, and those nations use nothing. And we're going to find out what those problems are. And another thing that came up, the dinner was fascinating because I had Bobby and I had, again, the head of Pfizer. You know who that is. He's a highly respected man who has run an incredible company. Likewise with Lilly, the top two people. And we had the head of the industry also. So all companies were represented. And I said, let's have it out now a little bit. And you know what came out of that meeting is that we're paying far too much, because we're paying much more than other countries. And we have laws that make it impossible to reduce. And we have a thing called the middleman. You know the middleman, right? The horrible middleman that makes more money, frankly, than the drug companies. And they don't do anything except they're a middleman. We're going to knock out the middleman. I'm going to be very unpopular after that statement.
He says he's going to knock out the middleman to lower those drug prices, Finn. And he also said, he's in favor of vaccines, but he's not in favor of mandates. What do you make of some of these statements?
Well, I think that, it aligns with what he campaigned on, and also, what's his pick for HHS, for Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. has also stood for and been very vocal about. I think, as we know, Kennedy has been a very, very vocal critic of the COVID-19 vaccine and the distribution of that vaccine, of course, and it even made those part of his coalition, if you will, that supported his independent run during the 2024 race. Of course, he ended up endorsing Donald Trump at the end. But some of what he outlined there also, I think, showed how it's more about President-elect Trump's beliefs on certain issues as opposed to RFK Jr. and also saying that he had this. That he was more open-minded than people gave him credit for. I think that also indicates, some of the stories we heard, including from the Democratic Colorado governor, Jared Polis, who came out saying that he supported some policies of RFK Jr. Also, his RFK Jr.'s attacks on processed food has also attracted some Democratic support. But it's also a very mixed bag there, and some would say very problematic, in potentially confirming him. However, I think that here Trump again is showing his support for his picks, as he did this weekend at the Army-Navy game, where just about half of those picks showed up to attend the game, and many of them in that box there. Kim.
And finally, Finn, we heard Trump comment on inviting Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky to his inauguration. Here's some of what he said about that.
Did you invite Zelensky to the inauguration?
No, but if he'd like to come, I'd like to have him. I mean, I didn't invite him, no.
Are you disappointed
Trump,
China
can I ask you a
Xi
question?
can't come to the
Conversational
inauguration?
board?
Are you disappointed that China Xi won't be at the inauguration?
I don't know that he won't be at the inauguration. I mean, I haven't really spoken to him about it. I don't know that, actually. I would say that if he'd like to come, I'd love to have him. But
it's interesting, Finn. He said that the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is more complicated than what's happening there in the Middle East. What did you make of what he said during this press conference about that conflict?
No, I think that it was really interesting, Liz. This is sort of this new new perspective, new policy on foreign policy that we've seen on what Donald Trump campaigned on, especially a big pivot from the current administration, more of an isolationist perspective, but also in certain areas more of an aggressive policy towards some of these hot zones across the world. But also he also talked about his relationships with some of these key figures. He talked, how they were potentially come to the inauguration, something that hasn't happened before. World leaders don't typically attend presidential inaugurations. So really kind of stressing that his ability to deal make as well, right? His ability to negotiate. So I thought that was also very interesting, Liz.
Yeah, there was a lot in that press conference. We could talk for hours about it.
A lot. We really could.
We definitely could. And I'm sure we will in the coming hours here on CBS News 24/7. Fin Gómez, thank you so much for that.